in theory, the degree should increase the odds of earning more income to repay it.
Right.
And we've already touched on how that's not inherently true anymore, but at least it boosts those odds in certain industries.
Right.
When you don't have that, then you are out there and effectively being looked at in the same way as someone who never went to college to begin with, in terms of employability, in terms of transferable skills. And being able to monetize that does get harder. And then it just puts unnecessary pressure, because I think about
on the
people,
family, because now the loan is now in the parent's name.
Exactly that.
Right.
It's more pressure to come up with a solution quicker, because that debt, it's putting you on the clock, and the interest, you see it skyrocketing. And so, yeah, it definitely can have really adverse impacts. And there's a significant size of the student debt holder population in that particular situation, where they went and attempted, maybe had to drop out, maybe family issues, pregnancy, took leave, whatever, never made it back through, but they are still carrying that burden.
Yeah. So when I say student loans, like how do you feel? Like, how do you honestly feel? So for those of us who don't owe, I know we're like, ooh, thank you, Lord. We are either done or we never owed. But for those of you, the millions of you who do owe, I know you're like, Lord, why do we even have to talk about that? And we have to talk about it because now student loans are nearly a $2 trillion problem. Okay, that's with the T, y'all. I did not say with the B. It's a $2 trillion problem that affects more than 45 million Americans across race, gender, socioeconomic background, all of the things. And what's interesting to me is when people started calling student loans good debt, I'm like, who made that up? Like, where did that even come from? And so I'm really excited that we have an opportunity today to really focus on this really important topic, because I know so many of you feel overwhelmed, burdened, don't know what to do. You can't even believe that there's a way out. And I certainly want to talk to a lot of you who aren't there yet because your student, call it your child, niece, nephew, godchild, they have not entered school yet. So it does not have to be this crazy. It doesn't have to be this crazy. So anyway, welcome to another episode of the Thank Me Later Show with me, your host, Jini Thornton, where we help you master your money and transform your life. And obviously the transformation that we are working on today is all related to student loans and how to escape this whole student loan trap. Okay, I'm going to emphasize the trap, right? Because it is. Otherwise, people would not owe $2 trillion, which is insane and crazy. So before we get into the topic, I want to just take a minute and welcome my guest, Briana Franklin. Hey, Briana.
Hey, good to be here.
So happy that you're here today. So I'd like to give you a proper introduction. Want to make sure that people know who I'm speaking with today. So Briana is a businesswoman, a philanthropist, financial wellness expert, leading the crusade to conquer predatory lending. And I know you've had a big emphasis, particularly on this whole student loan area of debt. Had the honor and privilege to attend Dartmouth, and you graduated with about how much in student loan debt?
$100K in principal.
$100K in principal. Mm-hmm. So just kind of for perspective, and that's one degree.
That's one undergraduate degree.
So I finished school, 2 degrees, and I owed $16,000. Mm. So just think about how much of a change that is. Yeah. And that was like a lot back in the day.
Right.
Yeah. And that's literally 2 degrees.
Yeah.
I'm like, $120,000, girl. That is crazy.
A mortgage in some parts of the country.
Oh, for sure. No question about that. But I do, I respect the fact that your pain of $120,000 from your school turned into passion for you. And you began what was called or is called the Prosperity Project,
yes,
where you're focusing on Black women and the disparity, the amount that we owe in particular when it comes to student loan debt. Mm-hmm. And I know you're focused on just debt in general, mm-hmm, predatory lending in general when it comes to the African-American community. Mm-hmm. So before we jump in, I just want to kind of set the tone for everybody. Let's kind of just talk about some of the statistics that we were talking about. Like, on average, who owes how much?
So if we break it down by race, by gender, we have Black women clocking in at about $42K in average student loan debt, Black men behind at about $38K, white women owe about $32 to $33K, and then white men it's closer to $28,000. So that's almost double when you look at that lowest end versus the highest end of the spectrum for Black women.
And then you shared something very interesting. You said after how many years white men typically have paid down how much?
12 years after graduating, there was a study that came out around 2019, 2020, and it showed that white men had paid down 44% of their average student loan balance. Black women, by contrast, owed 13% more on their initial principal.
Right.
So it was a staggering disparity that kept getting wider.
Right. Right. Now, and just to kind of set the tone, just as obviously being someone a little bit more mature than you, that, when I went to college, everybody didn't go to college then. By the time you started going to college, it was kind of typical and normal. So certainly there's so many more Black women. There's so many more Black men, but in particular, so many more Black women in college now, which is impacting the amount of debt that we are in.
Yes.
And then although a lot of us are no longer first generation, borrowing to attend college has become normal. Yep. And so let me just share this with you because I don't think you know this about me. So when my kids, both of my kids, we used to carpool to school in elementary school when Briana was in elementary school. So when my kids were young, I was just very clear. You don't have to go to school. I strongly suggest that you do. I am not co-signing for anything. Nothing. I'm not getting a Parent Plus loan. Period. You're going to go where it makes the most economic sense for you to go. Not where you want to go, not where you think is cute, not based on the name.
Which has the fly's colors.
Not based on the colors, not based on, we made an economic decision. And so although my oldest son, Trevor, went to A&T, where I went undergrad, people assumed he went there because I went. He went there because that's where he got the most money to go. Shout out to Hampton. I honestly wanted him to go to Hampton. They did not come through with the money. Guess what? Hampton was off the list, just like that. Done. So I think Trevor graduated maybe about 25, 30. Cameron graduated with zero.
Bless.
He owes nothing, not one dime. So that was the plan. I'm like, academic, sport, whatever you're going to do. We are not doing this. But I set the tone very, very early with my kids. What was your experience?
I wish it was that.
Right.
Like in a fairy tale world, it would have been. In reality, so to set the scene, I'm an Atlanta native, born and raised, as you touched on, grew up. And when it was time for me to make that decision, it really came down to Emory versus Dartmouth. And I had been told as a straight A regular, as a principal's list child, oh, you're destined for great things and you need to shoot for Ivy League. I was not the first in my family to go to college, but I was the first gen to have the chance to go at the Ivy level. And since I was 11, 12, it had been instilled to me from family, from guidance counselors, teachers, oh, this child, she has to go to Harvard. She has to go to an Ivy. So when it came time around sophomore, junior year, and those applications were going out, I had applied to 8 schools. I got into 4. And then really it came down to Emory versus Dartmouth. And financially, it couldn't have been more black and white. Emory, to put it as you did, they came through with the money. If I had chosen that route, I would have taken out $5,000 in student loans, and that's if I didn't get any sort of work study, which I know my parents, that would have been happening, and I could have graduated with a max of $20K in debt, and had such different life. So Dartmouth, on the other hand, the only Ivy that was on the table at 18, I'm not thinking about what's practical financially. I'm thinking about getting as far away from family as I can, living up to my potential to take that Ivy League route. Everyone kept telling me, oh, it'll pay off in spades. You'll be able to write your own ticket. So that was the plan, and that's the route that I followed. And they, by contrast, it would have been $250K across all 4 years without any scholarships or parental help, grants, et cetera. But even with all of that, it was about $25K a year in terms of the out-of-pocket financed by loans. So it was literally red pill, blue pill, and that's the route I went down, and it played out. and there were grave consequences, you know, and I think a lot of it was due to the generational oversight.
Right.
So my parents are both graduates of Hampton,
Yes.
and when they went back in their day, it was way more affordable relatively. They didn't get scathed hardly at all by student debt.
Sure.
So they were just assuming, oh, she'll probably deal with the same, you know, 20, 25K, pay it off, be done.
Right. And it wasn't true. And how I typically equate this, Briana, is it's like buying a Bentley.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, if you know you can't afford a Bentley, you don't even go to the dealership.
Right.
Yeah.
Why are you there?
Why are you there? You know, you might drive by, you know, like, oh my God, that car is so dope. Let's fly. But we have people literally buying Bentleys and they cannot afford them. So you can't buy you couldn't go buy a Bentley.
Not at all.
You couldn't go buy a house that you weren't qualified to pay for either. But you can get into student loan debt that you cannot afford to pay back. And that to me is kind of interesting. And that's where this whole good debt concept kind of comes from.
Yeah.
Like, how did it become good? You know, just because you're getting an education, I'm all for education.
Amen.
But I do believe in getting an education that you can afford to pay for and not just the loans that you can afford to get. Yeah.
I'm with you on that. And
Right.
it really does something to me when I hear people say that it is good debt. And
Right.
they blanket it with that term.
Right.
And I'm like, but it jacks up your credit like other kinds of debt.
Right.
And it sets you back from your savings and your wealth building goals like other kinds of debt that you have no business getting into.
Right.
And so that's really where I'm just so vocal about drawing the line between this issue being a deception issue versus a discipline issue. Because discipline, right, is, okay, I'm running up my credit card without a care in the world and I'm just living for the moment. And yeah, I know there's 28% interest, but I'm just going to run it up because friends are in town and why not? And this, right, it's presented to so many people, especially in our community, as if you don't go to college. I remember in my house
Your way
hearing, right,
Yeah.
if you don't go to college, what are you doing with your life? You're shorting yourself opportunities. So it's presented as a must-have, but priced as a luxury,
Right.
to follow the Bentley analogy. And that is where the deception is just running rampant because they're like, oh, yes, invest in your future, invest in your education. Don't
Right.
worry about how many loans you take on. It'll all pay off one day.
Right. And I do think, again, as a parent, we're allowing children to make adult decisions.
Yes.
And so that's why it was just never a discussion with my kids. I'm like, you say you want to go here. How are you going to afford to go here?
Right.
You don't figure that out, then you're not going there. Like, it's off the table.
Yeah.
And it was just never said to you that way.
No, it was not presented in that way. I mean, my parents were like, well, think carefully, but I think there was so much disillusionment by the metaphorical Ivy Tower.
Oh, for sure.
And there was just like, well, okay, to do things you've never done, you've got to, or to get places you've never been, you have to do things you've never done. And just thinking of it as fall on the sword, take out the loans, a Dartmouth degree will just open up every door for you. It's worth it. And there was just so much misconception and just the marketing that's done, taking advantage of families who have bought into that because it used to work that way over the years. It was pretty linear, and it almost did have more of a correlation of going to the higher caliber school, having a higher payoff career-wise, but there's that disconnect with the modernization of learning and technology, lowering that barrier to entry.
Right.
And now the correlation is all over the place.
Right. And I know Briana's speaking specifically to Ivy League, and I just want to say that I see families struggle with this at state level schools, at HBCUs. So this is not an Ivy League college issue. This is just about, again, looking at this, where do you go where you can afford, not just where you're dreaming about, not just that. Please think about it in its entirety.
Yes.
All right. So I have not asked you one of the questions that I have scheduled to ask you because I wanted to share your background because I think it's really important for people to understand why you're so passionate about this and why this is such a big, massive problem that we have right now. So let's talk about misconceptions. You know, what are just some of the common misconceptions? I know clearly we've talked about this whole good debt,
Oh, yeah.
but what are some other misconceptions as it relates to student loans?
So that would be the big one that, you know, it's debt in its own category. Don't worry about it. And it's inherently good. Other misconceptions around just the issue of predatory lending is that it's all a given that it's going to pay off for students in terms of the career opportunities, right? Because when it was started, so I think it's important to get into that history. The GI Bill in the 40s following the war introduced the first form of student loans. They were capped at $1,000 per year, which in 2025 dollars is still no more than $20,000 a year. Very attainable, very easy for the average student to go pay it off with the job that they earn from the degree, save for a house, start a family, live happy ever after. In the 70s, when the Student Loan Marketing Association privatized to become what we now know as Sallie Mae, that's when the industry started to really get its roots to become the issue we're now dealing with. And in the Reagan administration in the 80s, there was so much legislation passed to take college affordability off the table and to, reject the idea of free public education and to just charge up, an arm and a leg.
Pay for it. You want it, pay for it.
Exactly.
Yep.
And shoot for the stars.
Right.
Exactly. And then as it snowballed, there were so many players waiting in the wings to take advantage of that. In 2004, Congress passed legislation, or lobbyists rather, pressured Congress to no longer allow student debt to be discharged through bankruptcy. So we see just how this whole thing was predicated, and a lot of people are just blind to that. A lot of misconceptions are that, this is just to give children the option to pay for what they can't right now. This is just a temporary thing, and once you get through school, then you'll be A-okay. And they're just missing that it is exploitation at its most extreme.
Right. And so that is true. You can file for bankruptcy. You can have so many other debts wiped away. Mm-hmm. You are going to still pay your student loans.
Yes.
Think about the power the industry had to have to get that carve out. Yeah, that's saying a lot right there. So let's talk numbers. I'm a CPA, I'm an accountant.
Oh, of course.
What's the maximum a student can borrow? So when you think about let's start at the undergrad level. Are there some caps on these loans?
Unfortunately, no. There is no limit to how much. I mean, there's an amount to how much you will qualify for on your own. And then you touched on co-signing earlier.
Right.
That obviously will definitely increase the odds of a young person getting approved for more money. But I mean, the private side, the Sallie Mae's, the Mahellas, the Great Lakes of the world, they have no limits. They have no interest thresholds. It is just however much you're willing to sign your name on the dotted line for, they will happily give to you.
And you think about that in the context if you're borrowing, to buy a car or to buy a house, there's going to be a cap of what you can get. Mm-hmm. That you could literally borrow whatever you want in the context of student loans. I mean, I know you're in the $100,000 range. I know people in the $300,000 range.
Yeah.
Yeah. And not just one of them either. Mm-hmm. And so these are people that I know who have gone what I consider professional school, law school, but I'm still thinking
medical school,
$300,000. Like, when are you going to pay that off? What does that I can't even conceptualize what that even means. I'm like, that's crazy to me. That's absolutely crazy to me. And so let's talk about Parent Plus loans. Mm-hmm. So I've seen this be a real slippery slope for some of my peers. I have friends who have gotten Parent Plus loans, and their child did not finish college. Traumatized by this. Are there some limits on how much you can borrow for Parent Plus loans?
So for Parent Plus, those are through the federal side. So unlike with private, there's a little bit more regulation. Thank goodness, at least there has been. Mm-hmm. Right now, a lot of stuff is up in the air, but my family and I, we did not go the Parent Plus route. So a lot of this has been anecdotal. I'm hearing folks say that there were some limits because from the parent side, they were like, well, we don't want you to have to take on the entire responsibility of your child. It's part of a work study. It's part of a financial aid package as a whole. Right. So that was just one form of the funding that was available. But obviously it ties the student and the parent together from the credit side, and you do become effectively yoked together while that loan is still in play. Right.
Absolutely. So I tell parents all the time, I would never, ever get a Parent Plus loan, period. And that was a rule that I had. And I'm like, we're going to make decisions based on this. Now, I know a lot of times when I say this, Briana, people act like I don't love my children.
I hate how that's become the equation.
You know what I mean? I'm just
Yeah.
like, really?
Like
I'm
as
like,
though you're tossing them out to dry.
absolutely.
Couldn't
I'm
be further
like,
from the truth.
no. I'm just like, we're just going to make a different decision.
Yeah.
I feel like I have other choices.
Yeah.
This is not my only choice here. So that's really where I'm coming from. So let's talk about this financial aid award letter.
Yes.
I just find this to be so confusing to people. Financial aid, because I think a lot of times people think financial aid, like, oh, this is free money.
Right.
That's how it sounds to me, or even how it feels to me. But I know student loans literally appear on a financial aid letter. So let's kind of talk through, people have completed the FAFSA, for at the undergraduate level.
Right.
They get this letter and it is outlining what?
So the breakdown, it's a mix of things. So, you have some federal, depending again on who's eligible,
Right.
and it varies by state. Like here in Georgia, there's the Hope Scholarship. Schools have their own endowments and funds.
Right.
So it will definitely vary based on the person and the school and a number of factors, but it's that combo of federal funding through the school, what's expected and owed from the parental contribution, the student contribution, and then work-study eligibility. So that's when I found out, I do have that qualification. I got 3 jobs on campus. And now between 19 and 21, I made boneheaded decisions, have nothing to show for that money. But when leveraged properly, that can make a decent chunk up front in the principal before a loan would accrue interest. But it combines those different funding sources.
Right. And so for all of you families, when you're going to complete the FAFSA, you're going to send it out to probably a bunch of different schools. You'll get your award letter back. And this is letting you know, like Briana just said, how much the family has to contribute, how much you're getting in Pell Grants, how much you're going to get in scholarships. But it also will let you know how much you can get in student loans too. That's part of it. And so I know I hear a lot of families say, oh my God, I can't believe they want me to contribute this much. I know the numbers can be crazy. And to me, this is an opportunity. You need to keep shopping to
Yes.
me. Like keep looking because you need to be buying the thing that you can actually afford
Right.
again.
Past the Bentley dealership.
Exactly. Just keep driving.
Yes.
Keep driving. So let's talk about a couple of more things. I know I mentioned that I have friends who could not retire because of their Parent Plus loans. So after the student does not graduate, so I guess you just have to keep paying that Parent Plus loan regardless, right?
You're kind of in the worst of the situation because you've accrued the debt and you don't. I mean, the thing is, in theory, the degree should increase the odds of earning more income to repay it.
Right.
And we've already touched on how that's not inherently true anymore, but at least it boosts those odds in certain industries.
Right.
When you don't have that, then you are out there and effectively being looked at in the same way as someone who never went to college to begin with, in terms of employability, in terms of transferable skills, and being able to monetize that does get harder. And then it just puts unnecessary pressure because I think about
on the
people,
family, because now the loan is now in the parent's name.
Exactly that.
Right.
It's more pressure to come up with a solution quicker because that debt, it's putting you on the clock, and the interest, you see it skyrocketing. And so, yeah, it definitely can have really adverse impacts. And there's a significant size of the student debt holder population in that particular situation where they went and attempted, maybe had to drop out, maybe family issues, pregnancy, took leave, whatever, never made it back through, but they are still carrying that burden.
Yeah, regardless of if you graduate or not. Let's talk about if someone becomes disabled or passes away. So if someone, they have loans, they have, some crazy medical condition, they're not able to work. Do they still have to pay?
If they owe federally, the odds are more in their favor. And sad to say, if they owe private, it almost doesn't make a difference. I follow this one influencer on LinkedIn who was diagnosed with a very aggressive form of breast cancer. And she just wrote a scathing, effectively op-ed because it was so long, but it was a post chronicling how her appeals to her private student loan financer rejected her appeals to get her rate reduced or dismissed or paused while she was paying for treatment, literally paying for life-saving chemo. And they were indifferent and just basically came back with, well, we still need our $800 a month or however much it was. And so on the federal side, there's a much wider range of options and flexibility, but private, people have to remember they exist to pad their bottom line. They do not exist to open up doors for students and make this burden easier for family. 100%. It's all about how to enrich themselves. And then they can put it under the guise of making their dreams possible for higher ed. But ultimately, their business model is predicated upon getting as much money from the interest and even the upfront principal. So if you're disabled, federal, you have more options you can apply. There's waivers. There's definitely things for veterans. If someone becomes deceased, God forbid, it can travel to the next of kin with private, but with federal, there are, again, ways to get that dismissed and just providing documentation depending on who's in office and, just what the state of affairs is at that time.
Right. And so just to kind of summarize all of that, do everything you can to stay away from private student loans.
Amen.
That's the only thing I can say.
That's it.
I'm not advocating for loans, period. But if you have to get them, stop at the federally backed. Do not go to private because the rules are not in your favor. If you have any life event of any kind of going on. So what are some of the things parents should know about co-signing for their kids' loans?
Man, I wish I could bring mine in here to have a seat at the table.
Your parents co-signed for you.
They did.
No.
Yes, my father and his wife, and I appreciate them trying to do that to, again,
help
to
you.
Open the door.
Of course.
And think just taking the knowledge that they had from back when, right? In the 90s, going to a HBCU, thinking, all right, it's no big deal.
Sure.
If this is what it takes to stay. But I mean, the way that rocked our personal relationship, my dad and I've always been a daddy's girl. We were always so close. And he had a lot of money conversations with me growing up. Debt wasn't really probed to that length. It was more of wait until you have a full-time job to get a credit card and don't borrow more than you earn. It was very high level and fundamental, but we did not explore co-signing and what really is at stake until it was time for us to get into that situation.
Right.
And he and his wife, my stepmom, they did say, okay, if we're doing this, this is a real obligation. So if you don't pay, then that affects our credit. This is not just about you. So please be wise and please keep that in mind as you move forward financially. The thing was, though, there's that cognitive dissonance, what I call the hardhead factor of being a teenager who has not had enough life under my belt at the time to appreciate the gravity of those words. So it's I'm hearing them say, keep that in mind, but I don't have an appreciation
what it really
for
means.
credit. I'm just still like a late teen, early 20-something, trying to figure out what classes I'm going to take the next term and, how to brave another Hanover 50-degree or negative 50-degree winter. So when you co-sign, it literally is, I use the term yoking a lot, obviously. I'm a woman of faith, and so biblical imagery is always top of mind with this. And it is when you enter that legal contract together. And so a parent is basically making it so that child will get approved because they don't have the work history and their own financial acumen to get approved by themselves. But once that child is on the clock and they've graduated and it's time to go into repayment, everybody's financial health is on the line. And I got to see the worst side of that through my negligence. A few summers after graduating, I was so overwhelmed and just feeling what are my options? I kept equating it to trying to drown the ocean with a teaspoon. I was like, I'm not making bank, contrary to what everyone projected would be the case.
Right.
So I'm scraping together, certainly can't even touch these $750 a month that Sally Mae wants. So I kind of just resigned, it is what it is, and I'm not proud of that. But at the time, I just threw my hands up in defeat. And then about a month later, my credit got dinged. My dad's credit got dinged, and I got a very strongly worded email in my inbox expressing disappointment and saying, this is exactly what I warned you would happen.
Right.
This is exactly why we said, if you have an issue with affording it, talk to us, instead of just putting your head in the sand, acting like it's not there, because it's now affecting our ability to refinance our house and to get a better rate for our mortgage. So many domino effects, and it truly can get in the way of families. So I, like you, from the child standpoint, can't recommend not going that route enough.
Right. I thank you for sharing that. And I know somebody very well who they don't speak to their child, and they have not in several years. And the tipping point was the student loans. And the child who was probably in their 40s at this point too. Not like a kid who's just graduating, was basically like, hey, you should have paid for my education. You deal with it. You deal with it. And so the way that you deal with it is just by not doing it. And I think a lot of times parents are just trying to fix and, they want their kids to be happy and this is the right thing to do. But I always say this to people, if the person doesn't pay, are you okay with it?
Right.
Are you willing to accept the entire debt?
Exactly.
And if you can't say yes to that, then you do not need to co-sign. And it literally is that simple. And so that's why it's always been very easy for me. Like, no, I'm not willing to accept the whole debt. Nope. I can't and I won't do that.
Right.
Because I know it's going to have impact on our relationship for sure.
Resentment, to say the least.
Oh, easy.
I mean, we, thank God, we cleared that hurdle relatively quickly, but we were on the outs for a good couple of months.
Oh, for sure.
And I mean, resentment from both sides. He's looking at me like, what's wrong with you? You're hard-headed. I told you, blah, blah, blah. And then I'm like, what's wrong with you? Why would y'all put me in this position in the first place? Like, there was just so much dissonance created. But then once we stepped back and looked at it as I've heard married couples say, us versus the problem, not each other, we were able to find that common ground, work out the differences, have conversations. And my dad has gone on to become one of Prosperity's and my biggest supporters. And I'm grateful. But I know that we were fortunate. And like you said, it can cause permanent estrangement.
No, for sure. So last question before we take our hotline caller. Obviously, there's a lot going on at the Department of Ed right now. I told my husband the other day, I'm like, God, I'm so happy we had our kids early. I'm like, I can't imagine navigating all of this right now with the investment of what college means. So in light of all the changes with the Department of Ed, what are you thinking? Kind of, what are you saying? What are you advising people now in the context of making this investment into higher ed?
Yeah, I have gotten hit with a lot of DMs from people who've been following the work and now they're just like, okay, now what? Before it was the IDR, income-driven repayment plan. It was the this plan or that plan. But now, do I owe anyone anything? And I've seen that as a real question. And I've been following attorneys' responses to this because I'm like, this is definitely where the legal expertise
for sure
comes in and reigns supreme. And there are some legitimate arguments saying that while it is in this nebulous no man's land, sit tight. They're saying, don't just act like the loan isn't there, but they're like, just prioritize paying private for right now. Like, if you can, just defer, apply for an extension or a waiver, and just do everything you can to mitigate the federal payments while it hopefully works out. But in the meantime, just lump that towards, credit card or other forms of debt and certainly private student loans. And it's just really, the hierarchy and making an executive call, especially based on interest, because ultimately, if the department does hold up and then they can continue to legally enforce it, then okay, we come back around to it. But yeah, a lot of people are just advising to take that capital, if they even have it and we're planning to pay it, and just put it towards other debt for the time being.
Okay. Well, thank you for sharing that. And, people obviously are reaching out to me too. And it's like, listen, I don't know either. Yeah. You know what I mean? Nobody really knows. Yeah. Nobody knows what's happening. But if you already have debt, you can't pretend that you don't have it. This is, I can assure you that's not the answer. And then for those of you who have children who are in high school or graduating seniors, again, you certainly want to look at this through the lens of there is some uncertainty. Your child may still be wanting to go to school. Your options, though, may be fewer in the context of getting this debt and then also paying this debt back. We may not have the level of flexibility that we've had in the past that so many people, I think, desperately needed to.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, no question. So, all right, let's go to the hotline. There's a question for you.
Hey, Bree. My name is Marquise, and I'm from the Charlotte area. I've been following your work for a few years now through the Prosperity Project. I'm a single mom who had to take out a Parent Plus loan for my daughter's undergrad degree. Is there a way you could recommend going about transferring this loan so that it is in her name only and no longer on my credit? Thank you.
Yes, so thank you for that wonderful question, Marquise. I will speak from experience because I did this, not with a Parent Plus loan, but to break that tie that I keep going back to about the cosign loan, I refinanced my privately held debt. So I basically just went with another company, and then they bought out the existing loan, but then I was rolled into one lump sum payment through them. So it was new terms and parameters, but ultimately that did sever the tie that had my dad still on the individual loans, because we took it from those 4 loans between, 5 and 7K to a single loan for the amount of all 4. And then that did it. My credit also, I want to note, was in a place to where that could happen, because some refi companies are very stringent and they want a 700 or better. They're very selective. So a lot of people are actually running into obstacles when they try to go that route. So if your daughter is in a strong enough credit position, that would be my top recommendation. Otherwise, you can always go for consolidation, or just try it again after it's been 6 months, a year, to build some credit history and then reattempt to refi through a different company.
And I mean, I appreciate people who want to be like, ooh, this is yours. You take it. Whether it's the Parent Plus loan or if they've co-signed. But you have to remember, at the end of the day, the only thing that the lender wants is to get paid back.
Yes.
And whoever is the strongest to pay them back is who they want tied to the loan. So it is not meant to be easy to get you off the loan, because you're like, oh, I've gotten you through school, I'm done. No. They don't see it that way at all. How are they going to get their money back is what's most important to them. So just do, a little research. And I think a lot of times too, they're so desperate to change terms, they don't always know what terms they're going into.
Correct.
It's like, what are you giving up to get what you want? Because you could be going from bad to bad or bad to worse. Yeah. And I see that a lot too, just because you just want to be done with it. So again, do your research. Ooh, this is a lot.
It is so much.
Oh my God, this is
just
a lot.
only getting started too. I'm like,
it.
there's so much here.
All right, so let's talk about, tuition rates are, it just doesn't even make any sense to me how much school costs right now, And again, I'm someone who is very blessed to have the opportunity to go to college. And I think when I went to North Carolina A&T undergrad, I don't even think it was $5,000 a year. Out of state.
I
don't even think it was that much.
$5,000 for each year, so $20K across all 4.
I think so. I don't even think it was that much.
What a world.
Yeah.
Well, let me make sure I hear that correctly.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Like out of state. I went to college out of state 2 times. So now with these tuition amounts are just like insane. I think they're doing a good job of trying to allow us to normalize that now.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
Yeah. Like, oh, of course it's $75,000 a year or $50,000. Like it's not a big deal.
Right.
And I'm like
regular
gasping.
inflation.
Exactly. I'm like, it's ridiculous. So for families who don't have a lot of resources, any suggestions on what their strategy is if college is the goal?
Yes. If college is the goal for strategic reasons, right? Because I'm so big on being educationally agnostic. Like, what is the
What
best
does that
way?
mean?
So my way of thinking of it is keeping an open mind, right? Because I didn't realize that you had told the boys when they were coming to that age that college was not mandatory. I totally thought it was like, okay, I don't know which college you have in mind, but you're going to get a college degree. Because I know so many folks in our community are having those talks and kind of insisting on it. But I think that can create, as you know, and you saw this coming, so many unwanted after effects. And so I think it's important for parents with their child to take a step back. What are your skills? What is going to translate into a viable career for you using what you are naturally skilled at, but also what's monetizable? And then how can we move forward with that? So if after doing all of that reverse engineering, a college degree is the answer, okay, cool. I think to your point about prioritizing funding sources, go for the scholarships, the grants, get all that so-called free money you can, stack it up. I went to school with people who spent time applying to grants and scholarships like it was another class, and they walked away with millions in scholarships, no exaggeration. And whatever was left over following covering those expenses was theirs. And I mean, definitely it takes a lot of intensity and dedication, but it's doable. And even if it's not that much, right, at least tens of thousands are out there. So I would say start with those and then just go down that list of hierarchy. So the grants, the scholarships, savings. A teenager, of course, between 14 and 16 can get a first job and get that experience of earning money, being responsible for the expenditure, and then allocating a portion of that towards a college fund, maybe a match sort of thing with parents. And then federal, like we said, if you have to tap into loans of any kind, federal is the way to go. Private loans should be abolished. So, I mean, just for the love of all that is good and holy, that I wouldn't even say is a last resort. That should probably be a deal breaker, because I have seen firsthand how treacherous and underhanded those terms can be. For example, when I was repaying, I qualified for an interest rate reduction program that took it from 11 to 5%. They told me that I could renew in 6 months. I went to, and then, we've actually done away with it. Now that was it. So then it went back up to 11.75%. And then it was just climbing and climbing until I, thank God, got out through the refi. But yes, just to synthesize, start with the money that does not have to be repaid, and then go down and really just try everything you can to avoid private at all costs.
Right. So do you mind sharing how much your student loan payments are a month?
Yes. So from private, it's about $600. And then federal, because of all just everything up in the air, I actually haven't had to pay on those in about 5 years through the COVID parameters. And so that's why I was like, okay, writing this out as long as I can to keep knocking down the private. But yes, through the company I refinance with, which is called Upside, because it's bundled. So it's both paying down your student loan, but also seeding an investment account. And I will say things got a little bit sticky with them too. There wasn't as much flexibility as it initially seemed in terms of allocating how much goes to the loan versus the investment side. But in totality, it's $600. Federal, when it wasn't waived, it was $300.
Okay. So you were about $900 a month.
Correct.
Just like, what?
$1,000.
Oh my gosh. Oh my God. I'm just like, I don't even know what to say right now. I don't even know what to say. I would like to respond to something that you just shared, because when I talk to students and I talk to parents who are primarily mostly in school, and they're telling me about their majors. Oh, I'm studying this. And I'm just like, so where do people who study your major, where do they get jobs after?
Right.
No, I'm like, I want to know, like literally tell me where they go to work. Who comes to recruit your major on campus? Can you tell me the percentage of students who are in your major who graduated last year, graduated with jobs? Can you give me some sense of what their income was?
Yes.
And so these are some of the probing questions that I'm asking, because it's like you're studying this, but I don't understand how you make money with that major.
Yes.
I don't understand that. And so I'm doing it not to stress people out, but so you can be thoughtful about you're here. You're spending this time here. It's supposed to help you with your next step. I don't always see that correlation. I mean, certainly if you're a nurse studying nursing or engineering or of course, check. Like you said, most of STEM, I get most of that. A lot of other stuff, I'm curious. Yeah. Again, no shade, but I'm very curious about that. And parents, you need to be asking the question, because you're making the investment, and we can't figure this out at graduation. I see people approaching it at graduation.
Yes.
And I'm like, honey, you're too late.
You're so far behind.
Yeah, you're already too late, because you can't give me the data on who is coming to campus to recruit these students. There's a career services on essentially every campus. Tell me who's coming to hire. So that's super important. I wanted to mention that. Let's talk about the person who right now is drowning. What advice do you have for people who are like, girl, I hear what you're saying, but what are their options?
So I've been her, kind of still am her, but things are now moving in a better trajectory, praise God. But in having been her for pretty much all my 20s, Number one, breathe, because there are actual health consequences correlated to being in extraordinary amounts of debt. So take care of yourself first and foremost. Breathe. Don't hyperfixate on it to the point where it is like stressing you out. I've had elevated blood pressure. I remember last year actually going in for a physical, and they came back and were like, can we run your numbers one more time? Because that is abnormal for your age and activity levels. It was 133/93, and it was because I had fallen a bit behind on the private loan repayments. And I was stressing and crying myself to sleep because I was in the middle of moving to New York, putting down the money for my new apartment, and just, so many expenses, not enough money to go around. And the pressure, the legal threats that were coming at me. I mean, it was just completely cannibalizing my entire existence. So from a taking care of you standpoint, that's my first piece of advice. But then on the financial side, know the numbers. I admit that I spent so long hiding from that because I was just terrified of what it was going to be. But I followed one of the few things that I truly agree with out of the Ramsey camp, the snowball method, listing those numbers from least to highest, regardless of interest rate, and just knocking those down. Because when I included everything, I included the phone that I had from Verizon that, it was like, I think almost paid off. And I was like, okay, I'm going to start with that, $400, boom. And I worked around the clock. I had to completely swallow and get rid of all pride of having come out with an Ivy League degree. For so long, I was just like, I refuse to do anything that's not a corporate job or, just something with some sort of clout. And I ended up getting 2 part-time jobs working at Athleta and Orange Theory, waking up at 3:30 in the mornings to open the gym, and then driving 10 minutes up the street to Athleta until close, which was around 10, 11, doing it all again. And that was my life for 3 months. And
what did you study at Dartmouth? I never asked you that.
Yeah, I studied English literature.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, what did you think you were going to do with that?
That was a huge thing that kept coming up too. Was family was like, what do you plan to do with that? Do you want to teach? And I come from such a long line of relatives who do, but I was like, no. And that was sort of that disconnect that you're touching on is I was like, if my skills are as a writer, paying all this money and the average career earnings are 50 to 60K.
Literally.
That is just such a wide disparity that makes no sense to put in that kind of capital for that kind of training. And so it ultimately took this very winding, convoluted road. I was working temp jobs, part-time, minimum wage, and then ultimately got the foundation to start my nonprofit. But that is so atypical. A lot of English majors, sometimes they make it work through marketing, regardless of industry, a lot of writing, creative writing, it can pay off. But the resources that were there for English majors and humanities majors at my school were pretty much non-existent unless you majored in finance, government, something that could get you a 6-figure job at McKinsey or one of the big 4 consulting. They were disinterested in what happened to you after graduation. True story.
Yeah. And that's typical based on my experience too. I'm just like, tell me what you're going to do, honey. Like, what does this all mean? I just thank you for being so honest.
Of course. Yeah. I'm such an open book on this.
Yeah. I thank you for sharing your numbers, sharing your journey, all of the data, and then just really talking to the people who now have an opportunity to make a different decision because they don't have to. This does not have to be a student's reality
at all,
provided people are willing to, do a little soul searching and make a financial decision, not just an emotional decision about where they want their student to be.
Yes.
So please, parents, I need you projecting into the future, not just, I know I love my school too. Oh my God, Aggie pride, love my school, but what is best financially today and tomorrow, and do your best to not allow emotions to dictate such an important financial decision. So I know it's not all about money, but again, you would not be at the Range Rover or the Bentley dealership if you could not afford that. I'm not saying you don't like Range Rover or Bentley, but you would not be there if you knew it was outside of your price range. The last thing that I just want to say is I think people don't understand the predatory nature of all of this. It's easy for a reason. It's very easy for a reason. So just because it's easy, that doesn't mean that it's right.
At all.
Yeah. So please don't get caught up in this and in this whole, we'll deal with it later. We'll deal with it later. We'll deal with it later.
We'll deal with you later.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me ask you this. Before we close, this is just kind of our way that we like to wrap up our podcast episodes. I want to know your financial thank me later tip. So finish this sentence. If you blank, you will thank me later.
If you, because I did think on this, but then I was like, no, that sounds kind of corny. Oh, gosh. If you delay gratification, you will thank me later.
Okay. All right. I'm not mad at that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not mad at that. So if people want to follow you, engage with you, how can they find you?
I am all over on Instagram and LinkedIn primarily. So my name is Briana B. Franklin. Our work, Prosperity, we have actually pivoted because of all this uproar coming out of DC. So as a nonprofit, we actually are, discontinuing that operating model in favor of going into preventative through technology, but also through media and entertainment. So, but I am Briana B. Franklin. That's with one N. And then my new venture, UnDEBTfeated, is UnDEBTfeated, which gets into all this and then some on predatory lending and helping people overcome being burdened by predatory lending and debt constraint.
So for those of you who are already engaging with me, please go into our Thank Me Later community. You can go to thankmelatermoney.com, but we have some great episodes with our subject matter expert, Lenora Jackson, all about financial aid. So please engage with that. Of course, you know how to engage with me. I'll have all of my normal at Jini Thornton, TML Money, but thank you. Thank you for, tuning into this episode of Thank Me Later Show with me, your host, Jini Thornton. And thank you, Briana, for being here again. And I'll see you all next episode.